If you resonate with the idea of creating a world that is environmentally sustainable for future generations, a world that is socially just, a world that is spiritually fulfilling, if that resonates with you, then you are hearing the call.
Welcome to Edge Talkers. I'm your host, Todd Lennox.
Taoist, Buddhist, Muslim, Jew, Christian, Hindu, chosen few, temple burning, atheism, burning man, paganism.
Those are just a few of the topics we will be discussing and the people we will be hearing from on Edge Talkers.
Dogs and rats, childbearing, those without, single, married, gangs and scouts.
Thank you to Matt Venuti for graciously letting us use his song, The Rhythm of Life, for our intro and outro. You can download this song and check out the rest of his songs and albums at mattvenuti.com. That's MattVenuti. And indeed, in this rhythm of life, we are all in this together.
We're all in this, the rhythm of life. Rhythm of life. The rhythm of life.
Edge Talkers is about taking conversations to the edge with anyone. Bible thumpers, hardcore Trumpers, atheists, deists, and those in between us. Conversations at the edge of reason, the edge of comfort, the edge of purpose, the edge of reality. No subject is too out there or too fringy to discuss, but we will be concentrating on questions like, is our present way of life sustainable? And if so, for how long? Is Mother Earth a living being? How do you talk to Uncle Bob about global warming when he's wearing his MAGA cap to Thanksgiving dinner? And underlying all of our questions, as Charles Eisenstein puts it, what's it like to be you?
All in this together. We're all in this together. We're all in this together.
Rebecca Rogers is a Journeys program manager on staff at the Pachamama Alliance. She leads people on journeys into the sacred headwaters of the Amazon rainforest. In this episode, Linda Lombardo of voiceofevolution.com and I speak with Rebecca about her own journey into her current work as both a yoga instructor and a Pachamama Alliance staff member, as well as discussing how a visit to the rainforest impacts those who have had the privilege of visiting it and the indigenous people trying to protect it for us all.
My journey with the Pachamama Alliance actually began about 15 years ago, when I first entered the rainforest, and without even really realizing that I was looking for something, just feeling that I had found something, my purpose in the web of life. And I don't think I could have put it into words then, that everything has a purpose, everything has a place, and how everything truly serves a purpose, including humans. I have experienced when I'm in the rainforest that I am not a caretaker of the natural world, but I am in fact part of the natural world. And so I think that my journey actually began with that realization, not just what am I doing for my job, but who is the person that I am being. And that was the first time that I arrived to that sense of clarity of who am I being in the world? What is my purpose? It goes back further than that. My journey to Ecuador 15 years ago was together with my parents. My father was going back for the first time in 40 years since he had served as a Peace Corps volunteer. And it was a powerful experience to be able to share with my parents, actually, since I went down with both of them 15 years ago.
There's two perspectives that you shared, Rebecca, and one is that we're stewards of this planet, we're stewards of the natural world. The other is that we're not part of it. And I think there's a third perspective where we're seen as predators of the natural world that seems to have a growing influence as I look at social media. And I think we're maybe all this and more. And I was wondering if you might want to say a little something about that.
Sure. I think being stewards of the natural world and being predators or consumers of the natural world are two sides of the same coin, I would almost say, where we see ourselves as something that is separate, that is to be managed, whether for good or for evil. But I do see those as two sides of the same coin. And I think part of what Pachamama Alliance aims to do through our mission is to change the dream of the modern world away from one that is based on consumerism and greed. And the journeys is really a reflection of this. We talk about the journeys as being beyond ecotourism or adventure travel. This isn't an experience that we are consuming. This is an immersion and an opportunity for deep personal transformation where we integrate ourselves and our identity with the natural world. And so it is really asking people to go beyond that vision, the dream of the modern world that we are all a part of. We're born into this culture. We are complicit in certain ways. You can't get away from that. Even the best intentioned people can't get away from that. We are part of this culture, and to really invite people into a different way of being. And so this in essence is the journey experience. We have a list of activities that you might experience during the course of the journey, activities that our Indigenous partners might engage in on a day-to-day basis, but it's not a planned itinerary or a planned schedule. We don't pay a fee for a service and expect certain things in return. It's really an immersion into their way of being. And oftentimes they'll wake up early in the morning, and the Ashwar and the Sapara people of Ecuador are a dream culture. And so they will start their day by sitting around and drinking tea and interpreting their dreams. And then based on what shows up in their dreams, the symbolism, and they have deep wisdom and understanding of dreams based on thousands of years of this lineage of dream culture, in which they've grown really good at interpreting dreams. And then they decide the day's activities based on the symbolism that shows up in those dreams. So if they dream of a fish, maybe that has a certain meaning, and they all go to the river that day. If someone dreams of a monkey, maybe it has a different meaning and they go into the jungle that day. If someone dreams of a jaguar, then that has different symbolism and they might choose a different activity that day. And so they might choose the activities based on their dreams. And they believe that the dream world is where the veil between the spiritual world and the material world is the most thin. And so it is the most appropriate place to be deciding our day's activities in the material world based on guidance and wisdom that is coming from the spiritual world. And so really the immersive experience is not only of immersing ourselves in the natural world and seeing ourselves as part of the natural world and part of that greater web of life that exists, but also immersing ourselves in an integration of the spiritual world with the material world, where oftentimes in our culture we have a place of worship that we go to for spirituality, and we have a professional place that we go to for our professional life. We have a personal place that we go to for our private life, and we're very segregated. And in the rainforest, the division, the separation between the sacred and the mundane is not as distinct. It's all sacred. It's all mundane. There's much more of an integration on all levels.
How many times have you been to the Amazon?
Well, when I first went 15 years ago, I ended up staying. So I lived there for 2 years. I lived in a community in the north for 1 year. And then at the end of that year, I lived in Quito, but I would travel back once a month or so with volunteer groups that were going into the rainforest, and I would lead those groups. So I was living in Ecuador for 2 years. This was about 15 years ago. And then since then, I've led several Pachamama journeys, and I also brought a group from the yoga community. So for the last 10 years, I've also been working as a yoga instructor in San Francisco and working for a nonprofit organization within the yoga community that bridges yoga with activism and leadership. And so I managed a fundraising and leadership campaign where we would bring a group of people who are committed to personal transformation and also taking what they learn and how they might fortify their activism skills through personal sustainability, self-inquiry, and then take that out into the world to be of service in some way. And so we had led a group down to Ecuador about 6 years ago. And that was actually when I first met Pachamama Alliance. And that was my first introduction to David Tucker, who directs the Journeys program, and to the work of Pachamama Alliance. And it was like a plane taking off since that first introduction, since meeting David, learning about Journeys, learning about the work of Pachamama Alliance. I then came back and I took the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium led by Lynn Twist. And during a coffee break, Lynn happened to be up at the coffee table when I was there. And I told her how touched I was by the symposium and that I wanted to bring this to my community. And she said, well, we have a facilitators training. You should do that. And I said, I'd love to. So next thing I know, Lynn is up in front of the group with the microphone saying, hey, everybody, I have an announcement to make. And of course, she announces my commitment in front of the group. And I said, oh, shoot, well, now I have to do it.
There's no going back now.
I think there is an incredible power in being witnessed in your commitment. Standing in your commitment and being witnessed in that is a powerful motivator. So I did the facilitators training, met someone who was leading a Pachamama journey and was incorporating yoga into it. And so I said, wow, I would love to sit down with you for coffee and hear about your experience and how does one become a journey leader for Pachamama Alliance? This is my dream. So next thing I know, she's calling me and she says, I want to talk to you about this because it turns out I can't actually lead the trip this year. Will you lead the trip? So then she puts me back in touch with David Tucker to do the Journey Leader training. And at this point, I was getting ready to step out of my previous role with the nonprofit I was working with, the yoga-based nonprofit. And I mentioned this to David, and he said, well, that's fascinating because we actually have a position in the Journeys program that is opening up at the end of this year. So it was one thing after another. Doors kept on opening up, and here I am.
That probably feels, or tell me if that feels like you were being led somehow.
Absolutely. And I think the important thing for me to remember is that every time in my life when I may have doubted whether I was taking a detour from my path or whether I was sticking to my path, that it's like all rivers lead to the sea. If you have a purpose in life, then perhaps, the universe, spirit, in the forest, they call it arutam, which is the spirit of the forest or the spirit of life. It will guide you in that direction.
Beautiful.
Finding the people who are your people. And I literally had an image of you being carried along by them. They were just handing you from one person to the other and say, well, she's here. And that's how it translated to me as you were describing that. It was very powerful, very resonant. I always get the chills on my shoulders when something right. And that was really an arrow to the heart about being in your purpose.
It feels more like a surrender. Yeah, it feels like a deep honor. And to connect with other people who are experiencing a similar awakening, a sense of purpose, and a surrender to offering our unique gifts in service to the highest good, and trusting that your gift is distinct to you and no one else could be you in the same way no one else can be Lynn Twist. No one else could have your specific set of gifts and offering, and that each of us has a role to play. Our gifts, when we come together, is greater than the sum of its parts.
That reminds me of having just read Charles Eisenstein's new book, Climate News Story. He talks about that, where the number of people on your feed doesn't matter nearly as much as, where your heart is and where you're coming from and your connection to the living earth. And just so beautiful to start to see, for me, an opening into this connection with this living earth, and that she is really utilizing the best of all of us, kind of like, we're her little tentacles of the earth out there. Like each one of us plays our own role, and without each one of us, none of the others of us could be doing what we're doing. It's just such a beautiful idea. Well, let me just ask a question about if you remember your first meeting with the Achwar and what that was like.
The communities that I have typically worked with in my experience have been in the north with the Quechua, the Kofan, the Sequoia. And last year on a Pachamama journey was actually my first introduction to the Ashwar. I was expecting things to look and appear the same as the groups of people that I had worked with and that I was familiar with, but I was also prepared for things to not be as they seemed. And so my big personal lesson was, it was like going into a situation where someone gives you an apple, you take a bite, and then they give you something else that looks like an apple, but you take a bite and it tastes like a pear. And so for me, the different indigenous tribes in Ecuador can be like this, where Ecuador is a very small country, but it has, I believe, 16 distinct indigenous tribes. The Ashwar are one of them, and they are distinct in their warrior spirit. And so they tend to live very spread out in the forest. They tend to be perhaps more reserved than some of the other indigenous groups that I've encountered. They're incredibly humble and incredibly generous. And I was in the forest about a month ago leading my journey this year, and I was so touched, like my heart just cracked wide open, just meeting our Ashwar guides in particular. Because we met with a couple of different indigenous groups on the journey. We met first with the Salaka people of the Quichua, and then we met with the Sapara people, and then we went to Ashwar territory. And so we had a couple of different indigenous groups that we met with. And I remember feeling that these people are so courageous, in part because they are so vulnerable. Like their strength comes from their softness, and their hearts are just so open. Their spirit is so pure. And this is not to idealize them as, you know, we have this image of people in the jungle maybe who walk around in loincloths and spears, and they're this idealized version of a human that has not been corrupted by modern society. And it's not to say that they have not been touched by modern society. They have. They wear t-shirts that have, American sports teams on them, and they wear khaki pants. But you look at their feet, and their feet are calloused and worn because they walk barefoot through the jungle. And many of the younger generation have cell phones. There's no Wi-Fi in the forest. There's no cellular service in the forest, but they have cell phones. And they're really bridging these two cultures, this ancient culture that is an unbroken lineage, and this modern culture where they're essentially still living in voluntary isolation. They come out of the forest to go to the cities, and sometimes they stay in the cities and they work. Sometimes they stay in the city just to buy things or sell things or vote, or to come together for political meetings within the National Federation of the Ashwar or Indigenous Movement, and then they go back to the forest. And so they're really a bridge between what we call the modern world and this ancient lineage. And it's complex. They're incredibly courageous, but also a little withdrawn and reserved. They're incredibly generous and soft and loving and humble, and deeply wise. And they also want things like cell phones and candy and a lot of the same things that kids today or people in our culture today have access to and want access to. I think the thing that I would want to share most about my meeting with them is not just what you see or what you do while you're with them, but it's that feeling of connecting to someone who is just cracked open, someone who is just so clear in their purpose, so clear in what is their role in the web of life, and seeing them and experiencing them, witnessing them, and then experiencing yourself and witnessing yourself living life in that way. As Archon Lushwala, one of our spiritual advisors for the Pachamama Alliance, as he says, we have to learn first who is the person that we are being, and then everything can come from that. What we do in the world will come from that place. But we first have to learn who is the person that we are being. Who are we being? And so for me, that was my experience of meeting with the Ashwar. It's a sense of beingness that almost cannot be put into words. I always say to my friends and my community members when they ask, how was your journey? tell me, what was it like? It's hard to express in words. It's something that can be experienced because it is so deeply personal. I believe the journey experience is about personal transformation more than anything else. And so this is the experience.
Beautiful.
I'm curious about what might have changed since the first time you were there, whether it's environmentally, politically. I mean, what's the good? What's the concern with what you're seeing today?
I think that the risks in the world, the threat in the world to the rainforest, to the way of life of the Ashwar and the Sapara who live in the rainforest and are protecting the rainforest, is greater than it's ever been. The Sapara only have about 575 people remaining who identify as Sapara, who come from that lineage, who speak that language, who understand that culture, who embody that way of being. There are only about 500 left in the world. They are on the verge of extinction. Their territory is quite close to what we call the frontier of the Amazon, which is the place. There's a town called Shell, which is named after the company that founded it.
Wow.
And Shell is the closest frontier town to the Sapara community. And it's only about a 20-minute ride by chartered airplane, an airplane that seats between 4 and 9 people. So you can charter a plane from Shell into Sapara territory and only go about 20 minutes and you land in their village. But you're going to a place that is only accessible by plane, by canoe, or by foot. There are no roads. And so not having roads is the best way to protect the territory from encroachment by extractive industry, as well as a consumer economy. People who come in, they want to sell things, they want to buy things, traders. With the roads also come poachers and illegal miners, illegal settlers. And so Sapara territory is very close to Shell. It's only about a 20-minute ride by plane. And the people are literally fighting for their lives, and they're fighting for their way of life. And the irony of the Sapara people, in the same way that the Ashwar are so courageous, in part because they are so vulnerable, with the Sapara people, their vulnerability is so apparent. They are so close to Shell and to the frontier towns. And I have never experienced a culture that is as joyful, as open. I've never experienced anything like it before. And I've been traveling to Ecuador for 15 years. I've traveled to many countries and visited cultures around the world. And the joy of living, the pleasures of playing in the river or walking in the forest or telling stories of the legendary animals or mythological figures that come from their culture, that stories that have been passed down for generations, songs that they sing, sacred ceremony that they participate in, spiritual wisdom that they want to pass along. I've never experienced a culture that is as joyful and loving, that comes so much from that place. It is just so beautiful. So I do believe that the threat is greater than it's ever been. Ecuador is in debt to China for billions of dollars. And over the last 15 years since I've been traveling to Ecuador, certain things have improved greatly. The roads have improved greatly. Transportation around the country to get from one place to another. It used to take me about 18 hours. And by taking several different buses and then hiking and then a canoe to get to the community that I used to live in the rainforest. And you can now get there in about 6 hours. So road infrastructure has improved greatly, which actually has wonderful implications for people who need to come out of the rainforest to get medical support if they get bitten by a snake, if a woman has difficulty in labor, if someone has malaria. These are the real threats that people in the rainforest face, and they have to come out to get medical attention or to gather together as a political force, allying themselves with other indigenous people. And so there are some good things that do come from roads. School systems have improved. The middle class has grown. The former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, had invested a great deal in building the middle class and building the middle economy of Ecuador. However, he did it at I think the long-term expense of the country by essentially leveraging the country's natural resources in debt to China. So China purchased Ecuador's access to Ecuador's oil reserves or land rights in exchange for lending the money that was going to be necessary to build this infrastructure so that Ecuador could meet the immediate needs of its people. And I think this is not an uncommon predicament that many country leaders face themselves in today. But the result is 15 years later, Ecuador is now billions of dollars in debt to China, and it is now looking to auction off its last remaining nature preserves to China for oil development, one of which is Ashwar territory. And Ashwar territory, where we go, is considered by scientists, it is known to be one of the most biologically diverse places in the entire Amazon basin, and therefore probably the world. It is home to indigenous tribes like the Ashwar, like the Sapra, people who are fighting for their lives, fighting for their way of life, fighting for their knowledge to get out into the world, fighting for the joy that they experience to be shared with people who desperately want to connect to a place of joy and hope and connection. And Ecuador is right now in the process of perhaps auctioning off land rights to China for oil development. And so the indigenous communities are coming together. They're creating alliances. Indigenous tribes like the Ashwar, who are known for their warrior spirit, who just a couple of generations ago used to be at war with each other, are now creating alliances with the same tribes that they used to fight with. So you might have grandparents of one tribe who used to fight with grandparents of another tribe, and their grandchildren are now coming together. They're sharing a common language, a common goal. Some of them are intermarrying, and they're creating inter-tribal alliances through bloodlines. And they are rising up together, and they are allying themselves with the new Ecuadorian government. Rafael Correa left the country last year. His vice president became president, who now is very open to the idea of working with indigenous communities, working with the activism community, environmental communities to create permanent protected status for these lands and creating alternative models for land management and financing. Also in partnership with organizations like the Pachamama Alliance and Amazon Watch, one of the largest areas of pristine rainforest in the world that exists today. It's one of the most ambitious programs for rainforest conservation and indigenous empowerment that exists. So in addition to the threats being greater than they've ever been, I think there are also opportunities that are greater than they've ever been. We have technology now, we have science now, we have a global community that is mobilizing right now in numbers that you've never seen before. The Women's March, the Climate March, all of the rallies that are happening around the world, the Me Too movement, people who are rising up and finding their voice and taking a stand, not just for something that they're fighting against, but something they are fighting for. And that to me is the most inspiring thing that is happening on the planet today. I am so honored to be part of that movement, doing my small part. And I believe that everyone who comes together through the Pachamama Alliance and other organizations that are each doing their part. You mentioned Charles Eisenstein, and Charles Eisenstein talks about how important it is not to reduce climate change solutions to science and data, but to talk about our love for all life on Earth and how that love is going to be the greatest mobilizing force. And I think it's both. I think it is both. You have the Paul Hawkins of the world who are mobilizing and galvanizing the scientific community, the top climate change scientists and innovators and entrepreneurs and activists on the planet today to talk about how we can actually not just slow down global warming, but reverse global warming within our lifetimes. And here is the science to back it up. And here are the solutions that we can each engage in our own communities. That is going to call to certain people. And for certain people, that is going to be their gift, and that is going to be their unique offering. And then there are the Charles Eisensteins of the world who talk about connecting to your love and connecting to hope, and how you cannot quantify the beauty of a sunset. You cannot put into words the personal transformation that someone experiences on a journey to the rainforest when they are immersing themselves in a different way of being, and they experience for the first time hope and love and connection, sometimes for the first time. And they are utterly floored by it. It brings them to their knees. And it has the power to transform that one person. And then that person goes back to their community. And in the same way that you can cast a stone into a pond, it creates a ripple effect. That person creates a ripple effect in their community. And who knows how many people they touch or what way they touch them. I know for me, my journey with this work started many, many years ago. I could never have foreseen where I would be today. I can't foresee where I will be 15, 20 years from now. But I do believe that that ripple effect is powerful, and that there is a place on the spectrum for all of us to be called in the way that lights us up. So one of my favorite quotes is by Howard Thurman, who says, "Do not ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive." What the world needs is more people who have come alive.
Together, we're all in this together. We're all in this together.
I was going to ask you about that apparent dichotomy between Charles Eisenstein and Paul Hawken, but you answered it beautifully, so I'm not going to even ask that question.
Todd, it's what struck me is that and I agree. It was just such a beautiful answer. This recording will go down as probably one of the most times I've been affected to tears in a broadcast or in a recording. Wow. I just, Rebecca, you're saying everything that just feels like the voices I've heard, the voice I've been using. So it's just so wonderful. And to hear you say it so beautifully. I had a couple of quick thoughts. One was that we either need to offer Lynn Twist a plane ticket to speak to those folks in China about the soul of money. We need to buy them a whole bunch of the soul of money and ship them and say, please read this before you begin to buy out those beautiful natural places in the world. That just seems like such a travesty.
I would say that we had a Chinese woman on our founders journey, which is the only journey that is led by Pachamama Alliance founders. It happens once a year. It's by invitation only for people who are high impact, high leverage individuals. We had a Chinese woman on that journey a couple of years ago with that intention of mobilizing resources around the world in whatever way we can. This woman happened to be from China and a business leader. And she was so touched by the journey that she went back to her community. She put together a group of, I think, 12 business leaders in China to all come back to the rainforest with her. And so she convened a private group who then all came back, and they all had this experience. And they've now gone back to China. It's been about 6 months. So I think they're still maybe sitting with what the impact of the journey was and what they're going to do with that. But I have no doubt that impact is rippling out into their community.
Wonderful. Oh, that's so good.
That was our first ever delegation from China to go to the rainforest, which is so powerful.
More of that, please.
I would say we have a 3-part mission. One is to empower our indigenous partners in Ecuador to protect their own ancestral land. One of Paul Hawken's solutions in his book Drawdown is to empower indigenous communities. That is one of the most effective ways to create protected areas and to manage and maintain those protected areas. So that's one part of our mission. Another part is to change the dream of the modern world, which is by guiding people through transformative experiences, whether it's a Pachamama journey to the rainforest, or whether it's taking one of our online courses or Awakening the Dreamer Symposium, that was my foray into the Pachamama Alliance, the Game Changer Intensive. We've just created a course in partnership with Paul Hawken called Drawdowns, Solutions to Reversing Global Warming. And then the third way that we fulfill our mission is by helping to mobilize the resources of the modern world. Are you familiar with the eagle and the condor prophecy?
Yes.
So the premise of this prophecy, as you know, is that the eagle people and the condor people once upon a time were one. And at some point they separated. And the eagle people became very wealthy in financial resources, technological, scientific resources, and the condor people became very closely connected to the natural world and the spiritual world, and were very wealthy in spiritual knowledge. And so the prophecy holds that one day these two people will come come together again and fly as one. And so part of our mission is to mobilize the financial resources, the scientific resources, the political will to create the systemic changes that are necessary for us to come together with our partners from the global south, from the rainforest, indigenous culture, who have spiritual knowledge, joy of life, understanding of sustainability and social justice practices and principles that I think our world desperately needs and wants.
That's beautiful. If someone were interested in, as am I, in visiting the Amazon rainforest, participating in a journey there with Pachamama Alliance, are there any minimum health or mobility considerations that need to be addressed?
Well, for mobility purposes, I would say that the youngest journey participant we've had is 8 years old, and the oldest journey participant we had was well into their 80s. And we had a woman a couple of years ago on one of David Tucker's journeys who had a double knee replacement not long before going on the journey, and she was worried about her mobility. And throughout the journey, our Indigenous guides and other people in the group were stepping up to take her hand if she felt unsteady, or they would fashion her a walking stick out of a branch on the ground. And by the end of the journey, this woman's idea of who she is and what she was capable of, and her "we can do it together" attitude, that she wasn't in it alone, had just totally been transformed. And so I do think that there is some mobility that is a certain level of mobility that is required. We encourage everyone from the moment they register for the journey to start doing daily walks, swimming, yoga, start building up their capacity. You know, you land in the rainforest and our planes fly in, and on the airstrip, women and children will run toward the plane and they will pick your bag up for you. And it's incredible. On my last journey last month, there was a woman who was pregnant, holding a baby, and she had one bag over this shoulder, one bag on her back, one on this shoulder, and one on this shoulder.
Oh my
and
goodness.
She's barefoot, and she takes off running. And it had rained the day before, and the path is full of mud, and I mean, she just books it. And so we're kind of stumbling along with our rubber boots, and we're not even carrying our own bags. And, you know, we're moving slowly, and people are holding hands, and we've got walking sticks, and we move at a leisurely pace. But it's truly incredible and humbling to see what we're capable of doing. And usually by the end of the journey, people will have connected into a deeper sense of self-confidence in their abilities. People who are maybe a little shaky at the very beginning, by the end, they feel much more confident. But we do recommend that people prepare for the journey by doing hikes, walking, yoga, swimming, that sort of thing. I had one journey participant this past journey who we were about 2/3 of the way in, and I said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "I'm hanging on by a thread." I got to be honest. I'm not sleeping at night because I'm afraid of, something, or I'm afraid of not sleeping, or, she had all these this discomfort that was coming up for her. And she said there was a moment of realization in which she realized that her fear of discomfort was actually greater than the discomfort. And when she recognized that, she realized she was at a crossroads. Is my fear greater than my desire for personal transformation? Is my desire for comfort greater than my desire for transformation? Or is my fear holding me back from really being present to this journey? And is my fear of the discomfort, greater than the discomfort itself?
Yeah, I get that. Absolutely. Powerful. Speaking of flying in on airplanes, and I asked this as someone who flew 8,000 miles to live where I live right now in Malaysia, what do you say to those who are critical of the carbon footprint necessary to travel to South America on one of these journeys?
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot. I got it on my last trip. My response is that there are certain things you can do to offset your travel. There are also ways that you can minimize your footprint, and you can use this as a learning opportunity. for a lot of people, we travel all over the world. We travel in cars, we take buses, Amazon Prime, like transportation in general, just to get things delivered to us. The carbon footprint on the planet right now from transportation alone is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases. And that's a fact. That's a reality. So it's a natural question. Why would we be asking people to fly and emit all of that carbon to go to the rainforest, which is under threat by it's a main contributor to climate change and global warming? And so it's a natural question. And I think that it's part of the conversation around how are we complicit in the current state of the modern world? What changes are we willing to make in our lives? And sometimes you have to take one step back in order to take two steps forward. And we found that the overall effect on people's lives in the long term it's so great that for us, it's worth it to take small groups of people to the rainforest in order to create this effect, this long-term effect and the ripple effect. So we're looking at the long term, and we're also looking at the width, the breadth of people's impact when they return to their communities. I would also say that there are many different ways that we have an impact on our carbon footprint. And one of the main ways that we can offset our travel and we can have an impact in our own daily lives on reversing global warming is by reducing our meat consumption. We actually asked Minari, who's the spiritual leader and the shaman of the Sapara community that we visit on the journey. We asked him, we said, we talk all the time about changing the dream of the modern world. Like, what does that look like to you? What does that mean to you? And he said, go vegan. And he's like, don't get, and he's saying that all of this in Spanish, of course, but the gist of it was, don't get me wrong. He's like, I eat more meat than anyone. I love meat. But in order for us to transform into a different way of being, when you look at not just what am I doing, but who am I being, he said that people who eat a lot of plants are taking in the spirit of the plant. And so if we are to create a bigger shift in who am I being, then he said the people who are closer to plants, whether you're eating more plants, whether you're living close to nature or spending time in nature, you're working with plant medicine, you're cultivating your relationship with the plant world. He said those are the people who are actually going to have the fastest transformation, and that's the easiest way to change the dream of the modern world. Also, according to Paul Hawken and his Drawdown book, reducing our meat consumption is one of the best ways that you can reduce your impact. So it comes from both sides. There's a spiritual gain and there's a scientific gain. Then, that works for me. Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. And I also have said in the past, if you do use carbon, as applied to the rainforest trip, I would say you spent all that time and money and carbon to get there, don't waste it.
I think what I keep coming back to is it's almost, this is actually a concept that came up a lot in my journey. As fears come up, on the one hand, we also talked about trust and faith and surrendering to trust and faith. When you don't have a scientific, data-based solution for your fear, because in the forest, if you have a fear of what's out there and there's no separation between here and there, then you kind of got to sit with your fear. And at some point you decide, am I going to let this fear hold me back, or do I surrender to something else? And on this hand, you have trust and faith. And when I come up into a wall like this, where it's like, I don't have an answer to that question, but I do have faith. I have trust and I have faith that I am where I'm meant to be at this point in my path, that everywhere I've been up until now has led me here, that I have been learning the lessons that I need to learn, that I've been learning the skills or making the relationships and the contacts that I need to make along the way, and that what I'm doing now is going to lead to someplace else. Just trusting that it will all happen in the timing that it's meant to happen, that people are awakening at the pace that they need to awaken, that it's not my place to judge anyone for being at a certain point on their path, but that it's almost like we don't decide when we're going to awaken. We don't decide when we're going to have an aha moment. We don't decide when we meet someone and say, you're my person, you're my people. We don't decide that. It just happens. And so I think for me, there's a certain element of trust and faith that we are being called at the time that is appropriate, in the way that is appropriate, with our unique gifts and skills at the time that we are most needed.
Thank you. You know, some of our listeners will be Pachamama Alliance community members, and some of them will be people who may be hearing about the Pachamama Alliance for the first time. If someone was interested in knowing more, wanting to take a journey perhaps, because you expressed it in such a compelling way, how would they go about doing that, Rebecca?
Well, I would say the easiest way is to go to our website, which is www.pachamama.org, Pachamama.org. And on our website, you can browse through our different educational programs. Todd and Linda, you both mentioned Awakening the Dreamer, the Game Changer Intensive. We talked a little bit about Drawdown. We have community gathering events where people can either create a Pachamama community in their local area, or they can come together as the global community. We have a global gathering that we have in the Bay Area, in California. This past year, we had it in May. We have our annual luncheon coming up next week, actually, in San Francisco, which brings together about 1,000 people from around the world. Very, very powerful. There's also a page on our website that you can click on that says Journeys. And so you can read about the journeys. You can look through a photo gallery. You can read testimonials. You can look through our frequently asked questions. And there's also a page that says Dates and Itineraries. We have come up with an itinerary flow that we've honed over almost 25 years of leading journeys since that first journey that Lynn and Bill and John Perkins took that led to the creation of the Pachamama Alliance almost 25 years ago. And so our journey flow is pretty consistent regardless of which journey dates you sign up for. And then we have journey leaders who are volunteers. They're people like me. So I also happen to be a staff member. But before I was a staff member, I was a volunteer journey leader. And so there are people like me who are passionate about this work, who have a deep love for the rainforest and for personal transformation. And we volunteer our time for about 2 weeks out of the year to lead a group to Ecuador and to guide these journeys in partnership with an Ecuadorian guide who handles all of the Spanish translation and the logistics of the journey. And then we have local indigenous guides who teach us about the different plants that we see on a rainforest hike, or share with us their spiritual knowledge. And so we have multiple guides that support people on the journeys. So you can click through the journeys page, and my information is there. If you want to follow up with any questions, you can email Rebecca@Pachamama.org, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. We also have a weekly intro call that we do, I want to mention, on Wednesdays. We have a 1-hour call that is led by myself and David Tucker, the director of the Pachamama Journeys program, in which we talk a little bit about the origin of the Pachamama Alliance and the essence of the Journeys program, similar to what we've discussed here today.
Thank you.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time today. I just really appreciate what you're doing, what you're saying, and mostly how you're being. And you're part of something that is very near and dear to my heart, and I know to Linda's heart as well, and really appreciate the work that you're doing. Is there anything else that you didn't say or would like to say, or?
I would say that the Pachamama Alliance was created because someone listened to the call. Someone had a dream, they had a vision, they felt a call. And many people might chalk it up to imagination, or I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money. Who am I? Why me? What do I have to offer? There are many reasons to not listen to that call, but the Ashwar and the Sapara are a dream culture, and they believe that visions or intuition is how spirit speaks to us. And so I would say that if you hear the call, if you can see yourself in the rainforest or see yourself as part of a Pachamama community, if you resonate with the idea of creating a world that is environmentally sustainable for future generations, a world that is socially just, a world that is spiritually fulfilling, if that resonates with you, then you are hearing the call. And we are living in a time of greatest threat and greatest opportunity. And we each have something to offer. So if you are hearing the call, I say, go for it. And you are in good hands. We have been leading journeys and leading these programs for almost 25 years. And it is a beautiful thing to connect into a community of people who share your vision and share a common purpose and are coming from a place of love and hope. And I think that's something we all need right now, and the world needs right now.
We are all in this together. All in this together. We're all in this together. All in this together. All in this. All in this together. All in this. Yeah, we're all in this together. Rhythm of life. We're all in this.
Together, rhythm of life.
All in this. All in this. Here we're all in this. The rhythm of